They say the mountains keep secrets. I say they just wait for you to find them. Welcome to Witch Hollow, a place so deep in the Appalachian Mountains, it's been erased from the map. My name is Malik Raines, a soldier trying to find peace. But I signed up to guide a tour into a nightmare. There are strange rules to follow here, and breaking them means more than just getting lost. What's the creepiest place you've ever hiked? What's the creepiest place you've ever hiked? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step off the beaten path with me, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in Witch Hollow, the head count is never just the number of the living. The tour begins now. They say the mountains don't keep secrets. They just bury them under layers of rock and time, waiting for a fool to come digging. After my last tour in the Helmand province, a tour where my misjudgment in a sun-baked village led to an empty seat on the flight home, I came here, to the ancient brooding Appalachians, to guide people through a different kind of wilderness, or so I told myself. In truth, I came here to be haunted by silence instead of explosions. My latest job was a lucrative, off-the-books affair, leading a special access tour into a place called Witch Hollow, a gash in the mountains so steeped in bad medicine and disappearances that it's been officially off limits for 50 years. The outfitter, a leathery old man named Silas, with eyes as gray and ancient as the mountain rock, gave me the topographical map, a fat, sealed envelope of cash, and a tattered yellowed note that smelled of wood smoke and decay. On it, in shaky, faded ink, were 3 rules. Count your tourists every hour. If you see a white deer crossing the path, turn everyone around and end the tour immediately. It's marking territory for something worse. When you hear a train whistle, where there are no tracks, make everyone lie flat on the ground and play dead. The last guide who took a private group in here, a seasoned ranger named Mike, they found his pack a year later, snagged on a rhododendron bush. Inside was his head count sheet. It listed one more person than had ever signed up on the manifest. My name is Malik Raines, and my ghosts have followed me from the desert to the deep woods. The compulsion to count, to maintain squad integrity, was already a raw, open wound in my psyche. This first rule felt less like a job requirement, and more like a personalized form of torture. I met my flock at the trailhead, a barely there path disappearing into a thick, intimidating wall of green. 6 of them, 6 souls I was now responsible for. My new squad. The thought sent a familiar, cold dread coiling in my gut. There was Rowan Kelts, the filmmaker. He was young, maybe late 20s, with an eager, almost puppyish enthusiasm that set my teeth on edge. He was laden with expensive camera gear, his eyes constantly scanning, documenting. A modern shaman trying to capture the world in pixels. He immediately started asking questions, his voice too loud in the reverent quiet of the trailhead. So Malik, is it true what they say about this place? The Cherokee called it the Valley of Lost Voices, right? And the settlers after them. They said it was where the witches of Salem came to die. Amazing stuff for the doc. Then there was Teresa Lou, a woman in her 40s whose grief was a tangible aura around her. She was quiet, her movements hesitant, her eyes holding the profound, hollowed-out sadness of a parent who has buried a child. She told me she was here to find peace, but her presence felt more like a pilgrimage to a wound. Marcus Lee was her opposite. A retired Chicago cop in his early 60s, all cynicism and pragmatic muscle. He patted the slight bulge under his windbreaker. "Don't you worry, son," he'd said to me with a gruff wink. Whatever spooky critters these hills have, I brought some city-issued peace of mind. Hattie Blackwell was the youngest, a quiet girl in her early 20s who seemed almost adrift, her gaze distant, as if she were listening to a conversation no one else could hear. And finally, there were the Bensons, a cheerful, middle-aged couple who seemed blissfully unaware of the heavy atmosphere. Their brightly colored hiking gear, a jarring splash of color against the deep, dark greens and browns of the forest. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet, cloying scent of mountain laurel. "All right, listen up," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is a restricted area for a reason. The terrain is unforgiving. We stick together, we move at my pace, and we make camp where I say. No exceptions." And then I did it for the first time. The ritual. I pointed to each of them as I counted, my finger moving from one to the next. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The number was correct. 6 tourists. And me. 7 people. But as my mind settled on the number, a flicker of movement at the absolute periphery of my vision, a pale, fleeting shape half hidden by a thicket of hemlock, made the hair on my arm stand up. I turned my head, my combat instincts screaming, but there was nothing there. Just the deep, ancient woods, watching me with a million unseen eyes. I shook my head, dismissing it. My ghosts. They were always there. Just at the edge of sight, we set off, the trail quickly swallowing us, the sounds of the modern world fading into a heavy, oppressive silence. For the first 2 hours, things were normal. I pointed out flora, identified bird calls, kept a steady pace. At the top of the first ridge, I stopped them, hydrate, and stay put. I did the count again, my eyes scanning each face. Rowan, filming. Teresa, staring off into the valley. Marcus checking his phone for a signal he wouldn't find. Patty, looking at her own feet. The Bensons, smiling. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, correct. But the feeling was stronger this time. A cold spot in the air behind Mr. Benson. A sense of being watched not by the forest, but by someone in the forest. Someone standing right there with us, just out of focus. We made camp that first night by a small, gurgling creek. The fire crackled, a small bubble of warmth and light against a vast, encroaching darkness. As I was securing our food supply from bears, Teresa approached me, her arms wrapped around herself, as if against a deep chill. "Excuse me, Malik," she said, her voice a near whisper. She wouldn't meet my eyes, instead staring into the shadows just beyond the firelight. "I don't mean to be strange, but who is the 7th person?" My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about, Teresa? There are 6 of you, and me." "No," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "There's one more. A boy. He's pale and quiet. He just watches us from the trees. I see him every time you do your head count." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying, grief-stricken certainty. "He reminds me of my son." I turned, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy survival knife on my belt. I scanned the impenetrable wall of darkness surrounding our camp. I saw nothing. I heard nothing but the creak and the crackle of the fire. But I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that she was right. We were not alone, and my head count had been wrong from the very start. The second day dawned gray and oppressive. A thick, damp mist clinging to the hollows and making the world feel small and claustrophobic. The cheerful chatter of the Bensons had died down, replaced by a nervous, watchful silence. Teresa's words had poisoned the atmosphere. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like an approaching footstep. I did the head count when we broke camp, my voice tight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 bodies. 7 presences. The math didn't work, and the discrepancy was a grinding knot of dread in my gut. As we walked, the trail grew stranger. We began to see them, strange, ancient carvings on the trunks of the oldest trees. They weren't the markings of any known tribe, not Cherokee or Shawnee. They were complex, spiral patterns, sometimes interwoven with a stark, stick-figure depiction of a tall man with the head of a stag. Incredible, Rowan breathed, his camera whirring, his face alight with a feverish academic excitement. These are pre-colonial, maybe even prehistorical. This is evidence of a forgotten culture. A deer cult. This is the find of a lifetime. He seemed utterly oblivious to the growing menace in the air. Or perhaps he welcomed it. An hour later, I called a halt. Time for the ritual. My eyes scanned the group. 1, 2, 3. Hattie was staring intently at a spot just behind me, her brow furrowed. 4, 5, 6. The count was right, but as I finished, I noticed Mr. Benson's pack, which he had set down a few feet away, was now sitting on the other side of the path, as if someone had picked it up and moved it. "Did anyone touch my pack?" he asked, his voice nervous. Everyone shook their heads. The air grew colder. We pushed on. The path began to curve, descending into a narrow ravine, choked with ancient, moss-covered trees. The light grew dim, the air still and heavy. And then, it happened. It happened as we rounded a sharp bend in the trail. It stepped out onto the path not 30 yards ahead of us, silent as a falling leaf. A deer, but it was a creature of myth. A magnificent white hart, its coat the color of bleached bone, its antlers like polished ivory. It wasn't an albino. It was a solid, pure, unnatural white. It stood and stared at us. Its eyes not the soft, dark orbs of a normal deer, but deep, intelligent, and ancient. They seemed to hold the wisdom and sorrow of the mountains themselves. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, it turned its head, looked directly at me, and crossed the path, vanishing into the dense undergrowth on the other side. The second rule screamed in my mind, a klaxon of pure, primal warning. Turn everyone around and end the tour immediately. Holy God, Marcus Lee, the cop, whispered, his cynicism momentarily forgotten. Did you see that? I froze, my training warring with the stark, insane reality of the rule. I opened my mouth to give the order, to turn us back. Wait, Rowan pleaded, his voice a frantic whisper, already raising his camera. Malik, you can't be serious. That was a spirit animal. A once-in-a-lifetime sighting? This is the heart of the documentary. We can't turn back now. We've only just started. It's just a deer. The Bensons murmured in agreement, their initial fear replaced by a tourist's desire to see something special. He's right, Mrs. Benson said. It was beautiful. Surely it's a good omen. I looked at their expectant faces. I looked at the path where the deer had vanished. My duty was to keep them safe, but my past failure, the ghost of the man I lost because I followed intel that seemed wrong, screamed at me. What if the rule was just a local superstition? What if I aborted this high-paying tour for nothing, looking like a fool, a coward? The weight of command, of making the right call, pressed down on me. Against every screaming instinct in my body, against the explicit written rule, I hesitated. All right, I said, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. We'll push on to the next ridge. Then we reassess. It was a compromise, a soldier's fatal compromise. The moment we crossed the spot where the deer had walked, the temperature dropped a good 20 degrees. The air became thick, heavy, charged with the static I could feel on my skin. The sweet smell of laurel was gone, replaced by the faint, unsettling scent of ozone. And something else, something like burnt meat. We walked for another 10 minutes, the silence now absolute, a suffocating blanket. And then Hattie, who was walking point with me, let out a small, choked gasp. She pointed a trembling finger at the side of the trail. There, half buried in the damp earth and leaves, was a small mound of recently disturbed soil. It was not an animal's burrow. It was a shallow, hasty grave, and protruding from the dark, Rich earth was the corner of a rotting canvas backpack. Its faded color and specific brand of buckle, identical to the one worn by Mike, the last guide who had vanished in this hollow a year ago. The white deer wasn't a warning, it was a signpost, and we had just walked right past it. The sight of the buried pack shattered the last vestiges of normalcy. Mrs. Benson let out a low, terrified sob. Marcus Lee, the cop, unzipped his jacket, his hand resting on the reassuring shape of his holstered pistol. His cynical bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by the grim, focused alertness of a man who knows he's in hostile territory. "That's it. We're done," I said, my voice a low, hard command. The guilt of my hesitation was a cold, bitter stone in my stomach. I had made the wrong call again. We're turning around. Now, stay close, single file. But the forest had other plans. We turned back, but the path, it wasn't the same. The gentle curve we had followed was now a steep, unfamiliar incline. A large, fallen oak tree that I had made a point of noting on our way in was simply gone. The woods were actively changing around us, the geography shifting like a dream. We were not just lost. We were being herded. "My compass is spinning," Marcus said, his voice tight. "GPS on my phone is dead. No signal." The air grew darker, colder, the canopy of the trees seeming to knit together above us, blotting out the already weak afternoon light. The bird calls, the hum of insects, all of it had ceased. The silence was a physical pressure, a weight on the ears that was more deafening than any sound. Rowan's behavior grew more and more suspect, while the rest of us were gripped with a rising panic. He seemed almost thrilled, his camera constantly scanning the woods. I saw him pull a small, electronic device from his pack, an EMF meter, its needle twitching wildly. He wasn't just a filmmaker, he was a ghost hunter. Or something worse. He had known, I realized with a sickening lurch, what we would find here. He had wanted this. We were forced to make a cold, miserable camp in a small, cramped clearing as a premature dusk fell. No one could eat. The fire I built seemed to produce more smoke than heat, the flames sputtering and struggling as if the very air refused to burn. And then, Rule #3 made its horrifying debut from the depths of the valley below us, from the heart of the hollow where there were no tracks, no roads, no sign of civilization for 50 miles. A sound ripped through the forest. It was a deafeningly loud, piercingly sharp train whistle. It was a sound of immense power and industrial fury. The shriek of a steam engine under immense pressure. A sound that had no place in this primordial wilderness. It was wrong on a fundamental, world-breaking level. For a second, everyone froze, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of it. Then my training, my memory of the rules, my own phantom limb trauma, it all kicked in. "Down!" I roared, my voice a raw, guttural command. "Everybody down! On the ground! On the ground! Play dead! Now!" I didn't wait for them to comply. I tackled Marcus, who was standing frozen, staring into the darkness. I shoved Hattie to the ground, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying recognition. The Bensons, weeping, collapsed onto the damp leaves. Rowan, after a moment's hesitation where I saw him try to aim his camera towards the sound, finally dropped to the ground. We lay there, face down in the dirt, holding our breath, trying to still the frantic beating of our hearts. The whistle grew louder, closer, until it was right on top of us. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force, a wave of intense, bone-rattling cold and immense psychic pressure that smelled of hot metal, burning coal, and ozone. It felt like a freight train was passing directly through our bodies. A spectral, unstoppable force. I pressed my face into the soil, praying to a god I had long since abandoned, my entire body rigid with a terror I hadn't felt since that day in the Helmand. The sound held for an eternity, a single, sustained, soul-shredding shriek. Then, as quickly as it had come, It faded, receding into the distance, leaving behind a silence that was even more profound, more terrifying than before. Slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up. My ears were ringing. The air was frigid. I did a quick visual check. Marcus, Hattie, Teresa, Rowan, Mrs. Benson. Mr. Benson was gone. He had been lying right next to his wife, not 5 feet from me. There was no sign of a struggle, no sound, no disturbed leaves, just an empty space where a man had been a moment before. Mrs. Benson pushed herself up, looked at the empty space beside her, and a thin, high, keening wail of utter despair began to tear from her throat. The head count was now 5. The head count was now 5. The rules were not for our safety. They were a set of instructions for a ritual, a harvest, and we had just failed another test. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, shattered the group's remaining composure. Mrs. Benson's wails devolved into a state of shock, her eyes vacant. Marcus Lee, his face a grim, ashen mask, looked at me. His authority as a police officer completely yielded. I was the commander now, and my squad was shrinking. "What the hell was that, Malik?" he demanded, his voice a low, shaking whisper. "Where did he go?" I had no answers. He looked at it. Addie Blackwell stammered, her body trembling violently. She was staring at the empty space where Mr. Benson had been. I saw him. He lifted his head. He looked at the sound. Her eyes were wide with a terror that felt like memory. You can't look. That's the other rule. The one they don't write down. You have to lie still. You can't look at the eyes. "What eyes?" Rowan asked. A little too quickly. A little too clinically. He was checking his audio equipment, a feverish, triumphant glint in his gaze that only I seemed to notice. There was nothing to see. "There's always something to see," Hattie whispered, hugging her knees to her chest. Teresa was rocking back and forth, her voice a low murmur. The pale boy, she wept. He was standing right over him. He led him away. He just took his hand and led him into the trees. I ignored them. I was in mission mode. This was a hostile extraction now. The objective was no longer to complete the tour. It was to get these people out alive. It was to get these people out alive. "Up," I ordered, my voice hard as flint. "We're moving. We don't stop until dawn." But the hollow was a trap. The forest had become a living, breathing maze. Every path we took seemed to loop back on itself. Trees that had been on our left were now on our right. The creek we had camped by now seemed to flow uphill. We were like rats in a cage, and something was enjoying the sport. After what felt like hours of a desperate, stumbling march through the disorienting darkness, we stumbled into a small, unnaturally quiet clearing. The air here was stagnant and thick with the smell of decay, and we saw them. They were standing motionless among the ancient, gnarled trees, like a grove of grotesque sculptures. There were at least a dozen of them, previous victims, the hollowed ones. Their skin was the color and texture of gray, weathered bark. Their arms were elongated, twisted things that resembled bare branches. Their feet seemed to have literally taken root in the forest floor, moss creeping up their legs, and their eyes were empty, hollowed-out sockets from which a thin, dark sap seemed to weep. They were silent, but I could feel a profound collective misery emanating from them. A silent scream that was worse than any sound. "My God," Marcus breathed, his hand going for his gun. As we stood there, paralyzed with horror, I saw something that made my blood freeze. One of the figures, standing slightly apart from the others, was wearing the tattered, rotting remains of a green and khaki park ranger uniform. A tarnished brass nameplate was still pinned to its chest. I could just make out the name, Mike, it was the guide who had vanished a year ago. He had never left. We backed away slowly, carefully. The hollowed ones didn't move, but I felt their empty sockets follow us. A gaze of pure, eternal despair. As we retreated back into the oppressive darkness of the trees, a new sound began, overriding the ringing in my ears. It was a faint, crackling voice coming from a small radio clipped to Marcus's belt. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a recording, playing on a loop. A voice filled with static and terror. It was my voice. The head count is 5. The recording of me crackled. The head count is 4. The head count is 3. It was counting down. Counting us down. The sound of my own voice. A disembodied, prophetic ghost counting down my squad. Was the final straw. It broke the spell of frozen horror and plunged us into a frantic, stumbling retreat. The forest, no longer just a passive maze, became an active hunter. Branches, thick as a man's arm, seemed to swing at us as we passed. The ground, slick with a fine black mist that hadn't been there moments before, tried to suck the boots from our feet. The train whistle began its relentless, terrifying call. No longer a single passing shriek, but a series of short, sharp blasts that echoed from all directions at once. It was hurting us, cutting off our escape routes, driving us deeper into the heart of the hollow. Then the storm broke. A biblical deluge erupted from the black sky, the rain so cold it felt like sleet, plastering our clothes to our skin in seconds. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the writhing trees, and, for a horrifying instant, the silent, watching faces of the hollowed ones that seemed to line our path. We were running a gauntlet of the damned. "In here!" I yelled, my voice raw, spotting a dark cleft in a rock face, a shallow cave half hidden by a curtain of dripping vines. It wasn't much, but it was shelter from the storm and a defensible position. We scrambled inside, a miserable, terrified huddle of survivors. The cave was deeper than it looked, extending back into the darkness. As our eyes adjusted, we saw that it wasn't a natural formation. The walls were too smooth, carved with the same ancient spiral patterns we had seen on the trees. We had been herded not just into a shelter, but into a place of purpose. A temple. It was Hattie, the quiet girl, who began to unravel. The familiar terror of the cave, the enclosed space. It was the final key that unlocked her shattered memory. She collapsed, her body racked with tremors, her eyes wide with a terror that was 8 years old. The whistle. "It's his voice," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a torrent of recovered trauma. "When he's close, you lie still. You don't breathe. You don't look." I didn't look. Billy did. He just lifted his head. And his eyes. His eyes went empty, like holes. The stag. The man with the stag's head. He just breathed them in. She sobbed, grabbing my arm. "The rules are real. They're the only thing that's real in here. They're how you die last." Her words, a confirmation of our darkest fears, hung in the frigid air. And in that moment of terrible revelation, Rowan Kelts chose to make his move. He wasn't looking at Hattie. He was calmly unpacking a piece of equipment from his waterproof pack. It was a small, high-frequency audio device, a lure. He flicked a switch, and a low, almost subsonic hum filled the cave, a sound that vibrated in our bones. Outside, the cacophony of train whistles instantly ceased, replaced by a single focused and rapidly approaching shriek. He was calling it, summoning it here. "What are you doing?" Marcus Lee demanded, taking a step towards him, his hand reaching for his useless gun. Rowan looked up, and the friendly, slightly awkward filmmaker was gone. In his place was a man with eyes as cold and ancient as the mountain. He smiled, a thin, cruel slash in his pale face. "I'm documenting the climax, officer," he said, his voice calm, precise, the final, most crucial phase of the ritual. He raised a hand, and from the deeper darkness of the cave behind him, two more figures emerged. The Bensons, or what was left of them. Mr. Benson, who had vanished, was there, his eyes the same hollow sockets as the figures in the woods, and beside him stood Mrs. Benson, no longer weeping, her face a blank, placid mask. They had been hollowed, and they were now his guardians. My family has tended this hollow for generations, Rowan explained, his voice filled with the passion of a zealot. We made a pact with the spirit of this land, the great white stag. We offered it the blood of the faithless tribe that once trespassed here, and in return it granted us prosperity, power. But it grows weak. It needs stronger sustenance now. Not just life, but emotion. Strong, resonant emotion. He gestured to us, his eyes gleaming with a mad scientific fire. Teresa's grief, a mother's sorrow for her lost son, a powerful imperative. Marcus's anger and cynicism, a wonderfully bitter course. Hattie's recovered terror, the perfect dessert. And you, Malik, he looked at me, his smile widening, your guilt. A soldier's guilt, the deepest, most potent flavor of all. You are not just tourists. You are a perfectly curated 7-course meal to restore my God to its full power. I am not just filming a documentary. I am sanctifying a sacrifice. The hollowed Bensons shuffled forward, their movements stiff and unnatural, blocking the mouth of the cave. We were trapped. You're insane, I snarled, raising the heavy survival knife from my belt. I'm a keeper of the faith, Rowan corrected me, and you are the offerings. Just as he finished speaking, the entity appeared. It did not walk into the cave. It simply materialized in the entrance, a 9-foot-tall silhouette against the raging storm. It was a nightmare of bone and mist, a gaunt, corpse-pale humanoid body, topped with the massive, bleached skull of a great stag, its antlers like jagged dead branches. Its eyes were not eyes, but empty sockets that seemed to hold a universe of cold, hungry darkness. A gray, chilling mist swirled around its form. It lowered its skull head, and from the hollow space where a mouth should have been, that deafening, soul-tearing train whistle erupted, a sound that was both a roar of triumph and a dinner bell. The next few minutes were a blur of pure primal survival. Marcus fired his pistol, the bullets passing through the creature's misty form with no effect, ricocheting wildly around the cave. The hollowed Bensons advanced, their movements slow but terrifyingly relentless. I shoved Teresa and Hattie behind me, trying to create a defensive position deeper in the cave, near a pile of loose, sharp rocks. Rowan stood to the side, his camera rolling, capturing every terrified scream, every desperate action, his face alight with a look of transcendent, blasphemous joy. He was getting his masterpiece. The entity's gaze fell on Marcus, and the ex-cop froze, his face going slack, the color draining from it as his life force, his very will, was siphoned away by that empty, abyssal stare. He was being hollowed before our very eyes. I knew we had seconds. I looked around wildly, my mind racing through every survival scenario I'd ever trained for. But this wasn't an enemy I could fight. It was a force of nature. But the cave, it wasn't just a cave. It was a temple. It was a temple. And at the very back, half hidden in the shadows, was an altar. A flat stone slab, stained dark with the blood of centuries. And on it were carvings. Not just the spirals, but scenes. Scenes of the first betrayal. Men with rifles shooting down the tribespeople. And then, a scene of the tribespeople fighting back. Not with weapons, but with fire. And a specific symbol, a circle with a bleeding tree at its center. It was a ritual of banishment, a counterspell. It was our only, desperate, impossible chance. I grabbed Teresa's arm. The altar. We need to get to the altar. I yelled over the whistle's shriek, but as we scrambled towards it, the entity turned its gaze from the nearly drained Marcus to us, and Rowan, seeing my intention, stepped forward, a long, cruelly curved ritual knife, pulled from his pack, now gleaming in his hand. "Oh no," he said, his smile more terrifying than the monster at the cave's mouth. "The ritual must be completed as written." Rowan moved to intercept us, the ritual knife held with a practiced, steady hand. He was no amateur. He was a priest of this dark, bloody faith. The hollow whistle, the stag-headed god at the cave mouth, remained still, its empty gaze fixed on us, a predator savoring the final, terrified struggles of its cornered prey. It was allowing its keeper to play with his food. It was allowing its keeper to play with his food. The hollowed form of Marcus Lee, now a gray, empty husk, slumped to the ground. Another soul joining the silent, rooted congregation of the woods. "You cannot usurp this right, Malik," Rowan said, his voice a low, confident purr. "This altar is for sacrifice, not salvation. Your pain will be the ink that rewrites my family's covenant with this forest." He lunged, not at me, but at Hattie, the one who knew the most, the one whose terror was the purest. But Teresa, the grieving mother, the quietest of our group, moved with a sudden, shocking fury. She threw herself in front of Hattie, a small, fierce shield against the advancing fanatic. "You will not take another child," she screamed, her voice raw with the agony of her own loss. It wasn't just a protective gesture. It was a defiant roar of maternal rage aimed at the universe. She clawed at Rowan, a wild, desperate attack that took him by surprise. The entity at the cave mouth stirred, its head tilted. Teresa's grief, now transmuted into pure, selfless rage, was a new flavor, a powerful, unexpected spice. Its empty gaze shifted from me to her. It was intrigued. I saw my chance. While Rowan was momentarily distracted, fending off Teresa's furious assault, I shoved Hattie towards the ancient altar. "The carvings," I yelled over the storm. "The fire, what does it mean?" Hattie, her eyes wide with a combination of old and new terror, stared at the pictograms on the stone. It's a story," she stammered, tracing the lines with a trembling finger. "They didn't fight the spirit. They gave it a new offering. Not a life, a memory. They burned a story totem, a carving of their own betrayal by the first outsiders. They gave the spirit the pain to consume, not the person. A sacrifice of guilt, not of flesh." My mind reeled. It was an insane shamanistic logic, but it was the only logic we had. As Rowan shoved Teresa aside, sending her sprawling to the cave floor, I knew what I had to do. The entity was drawn to my guilt, the raw, unhealed wound of my failure as a commander. That was the offering it truly wanted. "Teresa, Hattie, get out of the cave now," I commanded, my voice ringing with a new, desperate authority. "Run as far as you can and don't look back." Teresa, seeing the mad resolve in my eyes, grabbed the terrified Hattie and dragged her towards a small fissure in the back of the cave I had noticed earlier, a possible escape route. Rowan turned on me, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "You cannot interfere. The offering must be willing or taken." "It will be," I said, my hand going not for my knife, but for the chain around my neck. From it hung 2 dog tags, my dog tags, and a single, dented one belonging to Corporal Miller, the man who had died under my command. The physical embodiment of my failure, the story totem of my guilt. The hollow whistle glided into the cave, its full, terrifying height filling the space. It ignored the escaping women, its empty gaze fixed on the tableau before it. Rowan, a false priest, and me, the true sacrifice. I didn't run. I stood my ground before the altar. "You want my pain?" I yelled at the creature, my voice cracking. "You want my guilt? You want the ghost that follows me?" Here it is. I ripped the dog tags from my neck, and using the flint and steel from my survival kit, I lit a small crumpled map, the map that had led us here, and held the tags in the flame. The metal began to heat, to glow. Rowan screamed in rage. No, that is not the right. The blood must be spilled. He charged at me, the ritual knife raised high. But as he did, the hollow whistle moved. It was not attacking me. It turned its stag skull head towards Rowan. It had been offered a choice: the convoluted, deceitful sacrifice of its false keeper, or the pure, potent, resonant guilt of a broken soldier. It chose the more refined meal. It raised a long, pale hand and pointed a single, branch-like finger at Rowan. Rowan froze, the knife falling from his grasp with a clatter. His face went slack, his eyes wide with horrified understanding, as he realized his god had rejected him. The train whistle sounded, not from the entity's mouth, but from within Rowan himself, a muffled, gurgling shriek. His body began to contort, to twist, his skin taking on the gray, bark-like texture of the hollowed ones. He was being claimed. He was being erased. Seeing him neutralized, I knew this was my only chance. I grabbed a burning branch from the sputtering fire near the cave mouth and ran, not out the main entrance, but into the fissure after Teresa and Hattie, plunging into the unknown darkness of the mountain's guts. The sound of Rowan's final whistling scream echoing behind me. We were alive, but we were far from safe. The headcount was now 2 women and 1 haunted, marked man. The fissure was a tight, winding passage, a natural tunnel that led us deeper into the mountain before. Miraculously, opening out onto a different, lower slope, we emerged into the raging storm, gasping, soaked, and trembling, the sounds of the cave and Rowan's final, horrifying transformation fading behind us. We didn't stop. We scrambled, slid and clawed our way down the treacherous, muddy mountainside for what felt like an eternity, driven by pure, primal adrenaline. The entity's whistle was gone. The oppressive psychic pressure lifted, but the feeling of being in a vast, ancient, and deeply wronged place remained. The very silence of the hollow now felt like a judgment. We stumbled out of the forest and onto a forgotten logging road. Just as the first gray, watery light of dawn began to break, we were a pathetic trio of survivors, caked in mud, scratched and bruised, our eyes wide with a horror no one in the world outside would ever believe. Teresa was in a state of shock, clutching Hattie's hand like a lifeline. Hattie, for her part, seemed calmer, the recovery of her traumatic memories having strangely cauterized the wound, leaving her with a grim, weary acceptance. It took us hours to walk back to civilization. The official story we finally gave to the bewildered park rangers was a carefully edited version of the truth. A sudden, violent flash flood had separated us. The Bensons, Marcus, and Rowan had been swept away. It was a thin, weak story, but it was the only one the sane world would accept. A massive search was launched, but of course they found nothing. No bodies, no gear. Witch Hollow, as always, had buried its secrets. Marcus Lee was declared a missing person. Hattie entered intense therapy, her family relieved to have her back, but terrified by the vacant places in her eyes. Teresa moved away, seeking the flat, open plains of the Midwest, a landscape with no hills to hide monsters and no trees to whisper secrets. And me? I was free, but I was also branded. The outfitter, Silas, met me a week later. I gave him back his map. I didn't take the second half of the cash. He just nodded, his ancient eyes knowing everything without me having to say a word. The Hollow chooses its own keepers, son, was all he said. Sometimes it takes them. Sometimes it takes them. Sometimes it sends them out on patrol. I went back to my remote cabin, but the quiet I had sought was gone. Now, the silence was filled with a low, expectant hum, I was no longer haunted by Corporal Miller's ghost. My guilt had been offered and accepted, but the acceptance had forged a link. I was now part of the Hollow, a tether to the world outside. The entity had been appeased, its hunger for my specific pain sated, but it was still there, slumbering, its territory now subtly expanded to include the lonely acres of my own heart. The final scene. It's months later, autumn. I'm sitting on my porch, cleaning my rifle. The motion's mechanical, familiar. The news on the small radio beside me is talking about a string of strange occurrences. A different national park, hundreds of miles away in the Rockies. A group of experienced climbers vanished from a notoriously difficult trail known to the local tribes as the Path of the Silent Scream. The reporter mentions the sole, traumatized survivor, a young woman who babbles incoherently about a beautiful, terrible white deer and a sound like a train where no train could be. I stop cleaning my rifle. My head snaps up. The wind, sighing through the pines around my cabin, carries with it a faint, impossibly distant sound. A train whistle. I close my eyes. I am no longer just Malik Raines, the broken soldier. I am the keeper, the patrol. I can feel the entity stir, not in the mountains of Appalachia, but in my own soul. A flicker of interest, a new hunger piqued by the news. It has found a new hollow, a new hunting ground, and it needs its herald to scout the territory. I stand up, my face grim. I go inside and begin packing a bag. My map of the Appalachians is on the wall, but I'm looking at a larger one now, a map of the entire country, a road map of forgotten places and whispered fears. Silas was right. My watch was over, but my duty, a terrible, lonely, unending duty, had just begun. The white deer's mark was now my own, and the whistle was my summons.